Isn't it fascinating to look back at the lunches our grandmothers made for us? They had 10 different ways to cook bacon alone. 10, and none of them are around today. If you miss your grandmother's cooking as much as we do, then hop on to tour her lunch table. A name you might not hear very often in the cooking world, as far as French cuisine is concerned at least, is Marie-Antoine Carême, but you can thank her for some amazing dishes such as the vol au vent. This is actually something that got so popularized in American cookbooks in the mid-20th century. In the 1970s, when a national interest in foreign cooking really started popping off in America, there were a lot of trends centered around haute cuisine, and especially things you would find in premium French restaurants. In French-American communities, a vol au vent was a typical Saturday lunch that you would find being served up by your grandmother. Marie-Antoine Carême is a legendary French chef, and a reason she got that acclaim was because she managed to make up dishes that would suit the average household. Vol au vent is actually not really something you'd find at a five-star restaurant or on the upper end of what your wallet could afford. Most people would treat this like a party meal, something to serve at cocktail parties or New Year's ones. It was just puff pastry filled in with chicken, mushrooms, and creamy sauces, but it blended all of those together to make a really warm and earthy taste, which makes it perfectly suited to something you'd associate with your grandma's table. Spiedies are also something you would find at gatherings for family or just friends, mostly because no party is complete without a good platter of meat skewers going around a few drinks. So, mostly people would enjoy these most when the meat was lamb, but some areas like California would use chicken or beef too. It was really the grilling where the magic happened. These plates of Spiedies set the mood in a party alight. It was a taste that, when they experienced it, people at a party knew that they were in for a really good time. The kind of dish that gets a crowd excited and hungry. There were even Spiedefests in Binghamton and all around New York in general. It was a part of the local culture that no big celebration was really complete without. The reason it got popular wasn't just because of a regional preference in New York, though. The dish was bold, tangy, and citrusy, and it could double as an amazing sandwich too. You would find these in street stalls throughout New York, as well as at homes, but nowadays the dish has faded away into irrelevance. I don't need to tell you about how much America and the West in general love rice pudding. It's been something that's helped rural and urban populations get through some disastrously tough times, as well as a warm memory from childhood for a lot of people. One variation of the classic rice pudding was a Swedish rice ring, which would mostly be served at Christmas or a family get-together, but it eventually extended into daily use too. The dish first started off as something you'd only find in Scandinavian communities, and they'd really make heaps of the stuff. Enough to go around a big family of 6 or 8 with a bowl for each, and it makes sense too since it was made using some pretty average ingredients. Stuff like rice, milk, and cream were all you needed to get a Swedish rice ring going. The way it differed from normal rice pudding is in how the dish was originally always made with some kind of spice and topped with fruit or served alongside jam. Later on, when it expanded past the Scandinavian locale and got adopted into widespread use, people started using nutmeg and cinnamon as well. Some scant cookbooks might still recall the dish and the times where it was a great comfort meal, but a lot of the new ones don't really remember it anymore. You hear the name Rumaki and you might start thinking about some pretty exotic dishes, but it's actually more of a humble appetizer that picks a few flavors and does them really, really well. It was also made at Trader Vic's, a Polynesian-style restaurant right here in Uncle Sam's USA, which I'm sure you didn't see coming either. I wouldn't blame you for thinking it's exotic, since at tiki parties it was definitely considered that, and when tiki culture as a whole started erupting into the mainstream of American eating, it was still sought after, with just as much interest. The dish itself also makes use of some things that aren't familiar, and some that are like chicken livers, water chestnuts, and bacon. It was a really good hors d'oeuvre that boomed in popularity after the World War II era, though you'd be pretty stumped if you tried to go out and look for it today. Still, it's kind of sad we can't go out to parties and experience chestnuts and crispy bacon anymore, wouldn't you agree? Or is tiki cooking not really up your alley? Green tomato pie is something that'll have you running back for seconds. First off, you gotta hand it to whoever made this dish for their ingenuity. It's not every day you get a banger of a dish that actually is centered around making the green tomato shine out of everything else. But Southern home cooking will do that for you. Charlotte's green tomato pie in particular makes use of some typical Southern spices like cinnamon and nutmeg and unripened green tomatoes, and has you making a pie that'll rival even the best apple ones you could find at bakeries. Green tomatoes have an especially great harvest during the fall, so that's when this dish would see the most mileage. You would find houses all over the South constantly making green tomato pies. And this specific pie is an example of how you don't need anything fancy to create something that can get everyone at the table. You know what's even funnier? This dish is one of the best things to come out of mock cooking because it was made to imitate mock apple pie and mincemeat pies. An imitation of an imitation ends up giving us something that was a big part of Southern culture. Who would have thought? I know for a fact you've all grown up on some of your grandparents' baked ziti, especially if you have some Italian roots, and if you do, then you share that in common with this dish. Right from the streets of Italy, immigrants first brought this dish over in the middle of the 19th century throughout the early start of the 20th one, so it had a lot of time to become something that people could love and associate with the finer things in life. People had a lot of time by the mid-20th century to try this dish, and plenty of families had passed their own secret baked ziti recipes down. The baked ziti really hit its highest highs during that time period in the 1950s to the 1970s, and it was something you could enjoy at both a potluck and a fancy at-home date. It was a staple of Italian-American cooking, and you could even find it at weddings. I, for one, think that really speaks to how popular the dish was. But what's your experience with this dish? And if you don't have any yet, is it something you'd ever try out? Now here's something that started out in the bleakest of times but quickly became a sensation throughout America even after the Great Depression ended. You can't ever beat a fried Bologna sandwich. I don't care what uptown neighborhood and what fancy restaurant you've been to. Something about that mix of Bologna with cheese, mayo, and sometimes even bacon and sausages is unbeatable. It was something that was incredibly beloved by the public right after the Second World War ended, and the Midwest in particular couldn't really ever get enough of it. Diners, homes, rural areas, local breakfast joints, everyone was serving an affordable fried Bologna sandwich. It was something you could rely on to both satisfy your taste buds, get you a healthy dose of protein, and not break your wallet if you had it daily, which was really asking for a lot in those times. Speaking of those times, another really good source of protein was catfish, and one of the best ways to have it was fried catfish with hush puppies. This is again something that'll take us right to the heart of Southern cooking if we eat it. Along those rural places near rivers, lakes, ponds, and other bodies of water where you could find fresh catfish in abundance. Hush puppies were something made with fried cornmeal batter and were a popular dish to give to soldiers during the Civil War, so all in all, this dish was really light money-wise. Some basic Cajun spices or a Southern spice blend would make it even better into a real full-fledged meal that you could eat in comfort with the family. While it's been a big part of Southern cooking ever since the 19th century, it arguably had its biggest glory days in the 20th one as part of Southern soul food. There was a time in the 30s to 40s where soul food started to get into more and more menus across several places in the South, which wasn't always the case. Thank God it did, though, because steamed catfish definitely doesn't hit the spot quite like fried ones do with some golden brown hush puppies. We're going to go forward in time a bit, all the way to the beginning of what most people consider the late 20th century, where stuffed zucchini boats first started becoming something you would hear about regularly. You know, at bars, from your friends and colleagues, or your partners. They became really hot in the 60s and 70s when it felt like everyday people were trying another dish from a new country that hadn't really touched base in America yet. It was the first time people expanded their taste buds beyond the bacon, pancake, and hash brown breakfasts they were mostly used to. Plus, stuffed zucchini boats were really healthy. They were a lot better to eat than those aforementioned breakfasts. The best part was that you could really change up the fillings. So depending on what you wanted, you could have fully vegetarian zucchini boats or ones with ground beef stuffings. People say this is a part of Italian-American cooking, but a lot of Mediterranean cooking makes use of dishes similar to zucchini boats, like using stuffed peppers and vegetables like eggplants. Hoppin John is a dish that has some pretty rich heritage. I'm talking about African, Caribbean, and Native American roots that all boil together in the melting pot known as the South, where it first started becoming really trendy. However, the origins of the dish are actually a bit darker than just a happy coincidence that somehow got into everyone's table. Though the people who were eating it happily wouldn't know, it was first created and brought over by enslaved Africans in the American South. It made use of African rice and pork, and yes, the best part of the dish were the black-eyed peas even in those times. Now, as far as the name Hoppin John is considered, nobody really ever knew where it first came from, or if there was a John who made this dish and brought it into everyone's lives, but the first time this name was mentioned was in the 1840s in a print. If you were down in the South and African American communities during New Year, then you would especially see a lot of Hoppin Johns everywhere. The aroma of those peas and the smoked pork wouldn't miss anyone's nose, as the scent carried for miles and miles away. It was eaten specifically on New Year's because it was a common belief that eating Hoppin Johns would bring good luck to people if they ate it to start the year. If you went into any new year with such a good plate of food, I'd say your luck was already pretty good. So maybe it does work? Brown Betties were one of the most classic American desserts to ever grace the table of an American kid. Something that might be seen as an old-fashioned dessert now, but used to be the next best thing after an apple pie. The flavors of a Brown Betty usually come from the spiced apples and other fruit-layered dishes, which are really buttery. The sugary breadcrumbs on top give it a crunch, which really adds to the entire vibe of the Brown Betty. You're looking for a warm, comforting dish that gets you in a nostalgic mood. Something you can sit down with and enjoy bite for bite, not rush through. It's an experience that you want to savor, like an empty, windy street as you walk down by and enjoy it. The Brown Betty was definitely something that would get you up out into the street, whether you were going to visit your grandma's for an authentic pie or a nearby bakery to reminisce about childhood days. The earliest recipes you can find are the ones from 1866, but those are more like Apple Betties than the ones we're talking about. Either way, this dish has definitely evolved alongside the population, and those who grew up with it will remember it fondly. Are you a big fan of deli food? Deli meats, sandwiches, loaves, that kind of thing? Then one of the best parts of that kind of eating was the olive loaf. It was usually made with pork and beef plus chopped green olives, which is what it became known for. There was a small, brief period before convenience foods started taking over America, where processed meats were really becoming a thing, and this dish was a big part of that time, which arguably spanned all over the 1940s to the 1970s. It had an extremely loyal fan base too, as this was responsible for many deli counters still staying in business. These days, you could find retro stalls that still do a mean olive load, but the days where this was a commonplace item on the street and something you'd see your grandma cooking up are long gone in America's history. People definitely remember the flavors of the Bologna, the ham loaves, and all the amazing dips they came with, though. We're going to take a bit of a deep dive into a cuisine that we haven't really explored before. I'm talking about Caponata, which is a very traditional Sicilian dish that goes all the way back to the 18th century. It's supposed to be a sailor's dish. Can you believe that? It got that reputation attached to it because the birthplace of Caponata was Sicily. There's no specific restaurant or name that's credited with making it, but if you ever went there, you'd know just how much the people appreciate this. The first time this became popular in America was when Mediterranean cuisine and Italian immigrants were mixing together and creating all sorts of new dishes, as well as bringing old familiar ones from their homeland. The best part about this dish for a lot of people was that it gave a chance to a vegetable, which otherwise people just aren't too fond of. I mean, eggplants aren't really the most main course-worthy idea you could think of, right? Pair that up with some tomatoes, onions, olives, and capers and cook it in vinegar, sugar, and olive oil. Make a nice little traditional agrodolce sauce, and you'll get this extremely earthy dish with a lot of complex flavors going for it. So this is a bit of a tricky name to pronounce even when you give it a genuine try, but it's worth knowing about this dish because of how good it is. Ballymaloe Irish lamb stew is something that comes all the way from County Cork, and lamb stew is something that Americans welcome with very open arms. You can particularly find this dish being spread in droves around St. Patrick's Day in any Irish-American community. Whether you're in New Hampshire or Rhode Island, which even today have a pretty solid amount of Irishmen living in them, you're bound to run into a Ballymaloe stew once in a while. Despite how good of a stew it is, with tender carrots, potatoes, and tender strips of lamb, and how simple the preparation is since it relies mostly on the natural flavors present in the ingredients, this dish actually flopped once before. Well, I wouldn't say it was a true flop, but it did fade out of the memory of the general public before too. That was before the 20th century, but ever since then it has been seeing a bit of a revival thanks to social media and Ballymaloe House, which is what it's named after. Either way, this is one of the best recipes to ever come out of a family cookbook. And if you've ever had one while at an Irish friend's home, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. Bacon. Crackers, I mean, sure, they're pretty good even as a typical easygoing breakfast, but what do we really do here? You eat something enough times, you tend to get used to it and get bored. How do you get around that? Well, since the topic is retro dishes, we used to hear a lot about bacon bow tie crackers back in the day. It was something you could find for breakfast or a cocktail appetizer, which is some serious versatility. The crackers were extra crispy since they were wrapped inside bacon and then baked until the bacon itself was pretty crispy. It was the perfect combo, and all they needed was each other to realize that. It was smoky but sweet. It was also savory, but buttery smooth and not dry at all. Dishes that are such neat little combinations like these are often hiding right under your nose, and if we didn't have the imagination of so many home chefs who found these and got them into the public sphere, then we'd be a lot more tasteless as a country. So the next two dishes we have on the list are actually some classics right out of Africa and its many varied cuisines. First off, we have chicken and collard greens pilau, which is just the perfect dish to have if you're aching for something that involves a lot of rice in it. The steamed and boiled chicken mixed with the pilau as a base for the dish gives it an aroma that's pretty much unbeatable. Back in the middle of the 20th century, if you really wanted to experiment with some foreign cooking and tastes, then you would go into African American communities and try out the best of their soul food. You'd have to look around a little for the really nice restaurants, especially if you were in places like the southern parts of America, but nonetheless, people found a way. Pilau itself is also a dish that's extremely common in the subcontinent for many reasons. People use basmati rice for this, which is a little different from the rice you guys might be used to, but if you give it a shot, you might find that it has a more full flavor all around. Also, don't even get me started on how good this is for you. If you're a gym bro looking for a great way to add some tasty protein and carbs to your diet, then chicken and collard greens with some pilau is a pretty flawless place to start. The next thing we have on the list is Hoppin John's soup, which is right out of the classics of soul food in the southern parts of America and all over, really. I say the South because that's where people most commonly associate its origins with. However, the Hoppin John dish itself was something that was a result of all the Africans that were brought over as a result of the transatlantic slave trade. This dish typically involves black-eyed peas and African rice, but in soup form, it works just as well with mushrooms, basic vegetables like bell peppers, and spices. This is one of the best soups you could find yourself making in the winter, especially if you live in areas where the temperature really drops to bone-chilling levels. It's so hearty and warm that the dish just screams pure comfort in every way and form. It was a really popular appetizer on a lot of restaurant menus, and it was amazing as a lunch too, but this is a textbook example of an old head recipe. You wouldn't remember it, and your parents probably don't either if they're a little on the young side, but I'm sure anyone's grandparents would remember having this, or at least hearing about it in the days when it was still one of the trendiest soups around. If you take a look at the history of Brooklyn, you'll find something that was really popular, which was ham cheese balls. These were the perfect bite-sized appetizer to gorge yourself on while you waited for the main meal. A lot of grandmas would have handwritten notes tacked onto family cookbooks about how to make the perfect ham ball, what the ratio of meat was, how much cheese you needed to put in, how much you needed to roll them and shape them before they were perfect. It was one of those snacks that just did well everywhere. In Iowa, too, it was one of the most easily available snacks you could find anywhere in the state. All in all, it's one of the best things to ever come out of the Midwest, and no Christmas is honestly complete until you down a platter of ham cheese balls and make the tray look spotless. Have you ever grown up around these? Do you still remember the taste? It's not something you would find so often nowadays, but the days when it was really everywhere were some good ones. I know we've had some wacky sandwiches and spread combinations in the history of the nation so far. A lot of those started off as slightly divisive, but they ended up making a place for themselves, growing out of the niches they carved into the food culture in America. Unfortunately, for Fluffernutter Sandwiches, it really did stay mostly as a niche, but a pretty good one. This takes your typical bread, nothing really special, and your typical peanut butter, again, nothing you haven't seen around the block 1,000 times, and adds a bit of a twist. You ever think about what peanut butter could be stacked on top of some thick marshmallow creme? Me neither, until I was searching about the history of this dish and how they were a Massachusetts classic. Known as Liberty Sandwiches and made by Emma Curtis in 1918, it was described as the perfect wholesome snack to get you a sugar rush whenever you needed it. Also, it was stupidly popular with children, especially around campfires. The stage for this dish goes all the way to Cleveland, Ohio, in 1970. The part of Ohio I'm specifically talking about is South Euclid, and the company I want to tell you about is Amster Pizza Bagel, Inc. They first submitted the idea for pizza bagels to the Copyright Office in 1970, which was the first official birth of the dish. However, the idea was pretty much cooking up a long while before it got the fine print out of the way. You can credit Anthony DeMauro for that, since the actual first time he made one was in 1957. 13 years of messing around with and perfecting the recipe led to a show stealer of a product for Amster Pizza Bagel Inc., which a lot of other fast food chains found hard to compete with. They even had a catchy mid-90s slogan, which you'll probably remember if you were a millennial from those times. Pizza in the morning, pizza in the evening, pizza at supper time, with an earworm of a jingle to go along with it. Something you can always associate with your grandma's cooking is waffles. There was no place in the world that could make a waffle better than your grandma, which is a belief that a lot of kids would fight you over. And I really do mean fight you over. For the kids, the peak of the experience was probably just getting those freshly baked waffles with maple sauce poured all over them. But for grandmas, the best part of the dish was how you could sneak in other things that the kids really needed and didn't eat enough of along with them. For example, one of the most popular combinations was catfish and waffles. Now, I don't really need to give you a rundown on America's relationship with catfish, especially around coastal and rural areas that are near lakes and rivers or anywhere you'd find catfish swimming around. It's one of the most affordable and easy-to-make meals, and you can spin it 100 different ways. Baked catfish, fried catfish, steamed catfish, it just doesn't get old. You take it a bit further and match it up with waffles, which gives them that contrast that cooks are always looking to give to catfish with sauces and spices. But it doesn't really hit the spot like this does. It goes to show that you never really can teach grandmas anything, can you? So today we had shrimp and sushi, and before that we had prawn, and even before that we had catfish and cod. So what came even before that? You'd be surprised, but in the 17th and 18th centuries in America, eels were really common. Early Americans absolutely loved one rendition of eel, which was Old LP, and the fishermen used to keep a sharp and keen eye out for any eel available in lakes. Whether it was local streams or popular fishing spots like Cape Cod, everyone would always gather around a fish market whenever fresh eel was in stock, because everyone wanted to make a fresh batch of eel pies for the family. Despite how tastes change severely throughout the centuries, one thing stays the same. A grandmother always loves creating new food for her children and grandchildren, and a lot of home cooks worked hard to perfect the ultimate old eel recipe that they ended up passing down throughout their families. The taste of old eel pie itself is something that's really hard to describe. It has a texture that's almost similar to apple pie, but it has a really sweet and savory taste working together at the same time. It feels like these flavors are going in opposite directions when you think about them, but in that single pie, all of them manage to sync and create something really unique. Would you ever recreate this dish in your own home, or is it too old-fashioned of a protein for you? Bourbon and chicken wings go together like birds and the sky, or like strawberry jam and bread. They've been one of the most definable aspects of American cooking and eating ever since they were first made in New Orleans, Louisiana, which got popular for its bourbon chicken. It used to be a subset of Cajun-themed cooking, but slowly, over time, its roots got diluted and it became more of a nationwide thing that everyone got into. One of the most popular types of bourbon whiskey was cherry bourbon, and one of the best ideas people ever had was mixing that with chicken wings to get a cherry bourbon edition of the best side dish ever known to man. The taste is impeccable. The bourbon enhances every single thing about the chicken wings, while adding a new flavor from the cherry aspect. It kind of gives it this sweet aftertaste that's not really overbearing. You know, some of the best additions and flavors to a tried and tested classic are ones that don't overstay their welcome. They don't overwhelm what you already love about the dish, they just take it a step further with the addition of something new. That's why this dish got so popular at cookouts and pot roasts and was a given if your family was having a pizza night. African American families in particular would love a big combo of chicken wings doused in cherry bourbon, because no party really felt complete without them. You might think I'm over-exaggerating because what can whiskey really do? Well, once you bake these wings to crispy perfection and then add them in a cherry bourbon BBQ sauce, you'll know just how good they are for yourself. Give it a try because it's probably the easiest recipe on this list so far. Fisherman stew was something that got popular because of necessity. Back then, fishermen used to be out at sea for so long that they'd often go days or sometimes even weeks without seeing home or their families. It was the cons of the job, you know? What were you going to do? Sit at home and hang your net, giving it all up because you haven't had enough time to unwind? One thing that hasn't changed about America ever is that the grind never really stops, so that certainly wasn't an option. What was an option was making the best use of whatever the catch of the day was. Sometimes you'd get shellfish or crawfish. Sometimes you'd get proper sea bass or red mullets and monkfish. If you kept some basic vegetables and seasoning with you, like red pepper, onions, cayenne, and salt, then you could still make a pretty serviceable stew. This is kind of why the term fisherman stew is a bit of an umbrella phrase. Depending on where you are in the country or what kind of time period you're talking about, it can really mean 20 different things. Just mixing up the spices creates an entirely new dish, so imagine what it was like changing up the main star, the fish, almost every day. They were creating new stews on a daily basis without even knowing it. It caught on so much and became such an acquired taste for your average fisherman that they began having it at home too, and from there on, you can probably put two and two together. You have one really versatile dish that can work with like 15 kinds of fish, almost every seasoning in your cabinet, and every vegetable in your pantry. Stews themselves are really affordable and feed whole families while keeping everyone's health up, so it's no wonder that so many grandmas and grandpas used to serve this as lunch. You used to only find a coq au vin blanc in French restaurants that really knew what they were doing. Top-of-the-line premium joints, the kind you'd maybe have to save up for. The black variation itself is a slow-cooked chicken stew, and this one is made with white wine instead of red wine. Some people that were familiar with the ins and outs of French cooking and had a good grasp of it would actually even make it at home. And I'm talking about before the slow cooker became everyone's best friend. They would really do the hours-long prep work just to get a taste of this, and it was worth it too. However, when the slow cooker did eventually come in, they let go of the ceramic pots, the cast-iron Dutch ovens, and the hours spent waiting for it to simmer and absorb the flavors. This meant that you no longer had to go out just to a restaurant for a coq au vin blanc. You could just as easily prepare one overnight at home without even paying much attention to it. The braising process was easily imitated by any standard cooker. Naturally, that kind of accessibility means a huge rise in fans, and this dish had no shortage of them even outside of French-American households that focused a lot on eating traditional, rather than keeping up with the times and going for canned, processed food. Did any lunch we mentioned ring bells in your mind and remind you of your grandmother? If it did, like the video and subscribe for more nostalgic videos.